Episode 7, with Chris Voss. Hi and welcome. You're listening to Barnraisers, the #1 podcast for teams. My name is Dan Stones, founder and chief cohesion officer at Shifting Peers, where we help people all over the world work better together. Now, I must give my first big shout out this week and thank you to all of those people who've been joining in with us online. This past fortnight, I've been hustling pretty hard on getting our Instagram account on point, and you guys are responding and engaging with it in a big way, which is awesome. If you haven't already, make sure you check it out. The Instagram account handle and Facebook and Twitter handle is @BarnraisersPod. So if you haven't already, make sure you jump on board for some original, unique and authentic team-based inspiration. Now, if this is your first barn raising, then welcome. What goes on here? Well, every 2 weeks I bring you the fruits of a conversation I've recorded with one of the world's ultimate team players. That's right, I talk to some of the brightest, the best, the most interesting and passionate team players on the planet. What sort of teams are we talking about, you ask? Here's the beauty. Teams exist in all walks of life, and that's exactly where our guests come from. All walks of life, all industries, all roles, and all locations. We talk to authors, sports people, business leaders, scientists, musicians, artists, filmmakers, and even FBI hostage negotiators. More on that in a minute. We do this all to find out the insights, experiences, mindsets and stories of some of the most successful teams. So strap yourself in. The show starts
now.
Think about this for a moment. At any given time, there are 10,000 FBI agents in the Bureau, but only one Lead International Kidnapping Negotiator. Sounds like a pretty daunting role, doesn't it? Well, you guys are in for a real treat because today's ultimate team player was in fact the FBI's Lead International Kidnapping Negotiator from 2003 to 2007. Chris Voss is one of the preeminent practitioners and professors of negotiating skills in the world. He is the founder and principal of the Black Swan Group, a consulting firm that provides training and advises Fortune 500 companies through complex negotiations. Chris has taught for many business schools, including the University of Southern California's Marshall School of Business, Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business, Harvard University, MIT's Sloan School of Management, and Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. Chris is also the author of Never Split the Difference, a book that takes you inside the world of high-stakes negotiations, revealing the skills that help Chris and his colleagues succeed when it mattered most. In his practical guide, he shares the 9 effective principles, counterintuitive tactics, and strategies you too can use to become more persuasive in both your personal and professional life. In this conversation, you're hearing from one of the very best of the very best. Chris's understanding and experiences with emotional intelligence are second to none. His command of what it takes to influence others in any situation is simply astounding. And it's a shame I couldn't get him to talk even longer. Because as much as we get into trust, agreements, leadership, negotiations and teamwork, we only manage to just scratch the surface. If you want to learn how to use emotions, instincts and insights in any encounter to better connect with your teammates, customers, friends and family, then you're in the right place. And Chris is just the right mentor. You're really going to love this one. Without keeping you waiting any longer, ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege and honour to introduce you all to Mr. Chris Voss. How long have you been a professional negotiator, and why did you dedicate yourself to this line of work?
Well, yeah, the time frame, I'm not sure when you would clearly, when I might mark it. I became a hostage negotiator in 1992, and in April of 1992 is when I graduated from the FBI's crisis negotiation course. Now, the reason why I was kind of vague on it, because I had been volunteering on a suicide hotline for about a year and a half prior to that, and my volunteer time on the hotline was I went there to learn those skills. But I started as a FBI hostage negotiator in 1992. Was teaching on the hotline, was teaching hostage negotiation, doing it in addition to my regular duties as an FBI agent, investigator, and continued to develop the program. And then took over the International Kidnap Response Program and focused on kidnappings in about 2003. Went down to the FBI Academy at Quantico, and then left the Bureau in 2007, and right away started teaching taught at Harvard Law School, taught business negotiation at Harvard Law in 2006. And actually I went through the course in 2006, and I taught there in 2008. So that's kind of roughly. Then 1,000% focused on business negotiation since 2009.
Yeah, I want to get into that, actually. I think that's quite interesting. And that's with your company, the Black Swan Group, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Just before we move on from that, then it's important to point out you didn't sort of build up to this sort of hostage negotiation. As you said, you worked on the suicide hotline, but as you explain in your book, that was sort of your first step, wasn't it? You sort of went straight to the deep end.
Yeah, you know what? Exactly right. I mean, the training was great, and that is emotional intelligence, man. You were diving in as deep as you can get on a crisis hotline, learning how to navigate emotional intelligence, but actually very quickly, too. A lot of people, I was shocked to find out when I went on the hotline that they weren't going to let us be on the phone with anybody for longer than 20 minutes. You know, you see them do it in the movies, and people are on the phone for hours.
Yeah, yeah.
And what you find is an emotional intelligence approach to conversation shrinks long conversations down incredibly. I mean, it's an incredible time saver just to back up a little bit and apply this stuff, and you'd be surprised at how much faster things move forward. You actually make progress very quickly.
Yeah, it sounds like it's just so much more effective than some of the dances that we tend to do day to day.
Right.
And I think that's something we're going to definitely talk about.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of hostage negotiation, one of the things that struck me in the book, and we'll talk a bit more about it in a moment, but one of the things that really did strike me was the whole idea of this, what I called the kidnapping industry, and just how common it is. I mean, how common is it not only in the US, but also in other countries?
It has different versions. I mean, it's a little bit like a virus. And once it gets started in a country, the money's so good that you can't really get rid of it entirely. In the U.S., it's principally, if it exists, it's criminal on criminal kidnapping, mostly bad on bad. Inside the U.K., it's mostly bad on bad. It's a lot more common in the U.K. mainly because, as everybody knows, the U.S. is a gun culture, and the bad guys in the U.K., you guys got a knife culture. So, people get taken hostage more often. But then it morphs a little bit once you get out of the first world and you get into, so to speak, to use what may well be an archaic term, but you get into the developing world, then it's a business, and it's a commodities business. And if where either law enforcement or the government is incapable of slowing it down, again, it's very good money. A lot of Latin America has it. A lot of South America, Central America, a lot of the Middle East. There are parts of the world where it's actually socially acceptable to kidnap. The Middle East is one of those places. They don't get bent out of shape when they kidnap people. They've been doing that for thousands of years. In the West, we get all bent out of shape over kidnappings. It's not socially acceptable. There are parts of the world where it is. It's horrific, and then how the society accepts it has a big effect on how the industry evolves and whether or not it remains. And the people that are engaged in it are in a commodities business, and they have a division of labor. And like any other business, they got a boss that doesn't do most of the actual hands-on work, and there's hands-on work to kidnapping. And there are people Just like in the business world, there are people that are salespeople. In the kidnapping world, there are people that are negotiators. That's what they do for a living. They negotiate ransoms. So it's kind of crazy when you start to realize, our horrific incident is another guy's day at the office.
And that's one of the things as I was reading the book. It's like this isn't sort of random events. This is day in, day out life for these people that are involved in this sort of stuff.
As crazy as it is, that's the truth.
Yeah.
And as soon as you wake up to how the other side sees things, you get better at dealing with it.
Yeah, of course. I couldn't agree more. Now, obviously, all of your kidnappings are highly positive results. But what's the most common way for these sort of things to play out? I mean, what percentage end up in, say, a ransom paid in full, ransom paid in part, or the threats that are actually being put forward are actually carried out?
No matter how dangerous the environment is, still the majority are settled with a ransom of some sort.
Right.
Reason why hostage negotiation works in business deals is because you're dealing with human beings, and there are some rules that are always true with human beings. Mm-hmm. The reason why hostage negotiators in the UK use the same skills as the hostage negotiators in Tokyo, and the hostage negotiators in Cape Town, and the hostage negotiators in Melbourne, and the hostage negotiators in Los Angeles, because you're dealing with human beings, and the rules for human beings are the same. One of those rules is greed. You start waving dollars in front of nearly anybody, and they're going to get interested. And that's even political kidnappings in an environment where there are political kidnappings, they still devolve into the ransom business. ISIS is in the ransom business because regardless of how much they talk about a different system, you start waving money in front of them and they get greedy. Mm-hmm. And so almost all kidnapping industries, and in fact all of them, ultimately devolve into a ransom business.
Right. So it's a deal to be made.
There's a deal to be made. All you got to do is use a little empathy, let them have their say, and wave some dollars in front of them. And you're going to resolve.
Right. And does anyone get away with kidnapping? I mean, for instance, and I'm thinking, I don't mean get away with it's a loose term, but for instance, once a ransom's been paid, is it sort of we all dust ourselves off, wave our hands, and sort of and life goes on? Or do they always end up getting caught in the end?
In the developed world, they get caught.
Yeah.
In the developing world, they don't. That's kind of the short answer.
Right.
In a country, Australia, has got the things that causes bad guys to get caught is, first of all, it's not socially acceptable, so it's harder for them to hide.
Right.
You've got a good, solid law enforcement infrastructure, so they're going to get caught. You've got a good judicial system. They're going to get convicted. You've got a pretty good correctional system. They're going to go to jail and they're going to stay there. Mm. Any country that has problems with kidnapping, one of those systems are breaking down. Brazil, for example, it's relatively acceptable to kidnap people because the society tolerates it. While they have a really strong law enforcement infrastructure, their correctional system is third world completely. They put 70 people in a cell that 5 people should be in.
Right.
They have jailbreaks on a regular basis because they got 70 people in a cell and they got 2 guards. Even if they their system of laws, no matter what you do, I think the longest amount of time that you can stay in jail for anything, I believe, is 10 years.
Really?
So even if they keep you in jail, you're not going to be there long. They're police who are not that well trained, but are very well funded in terms of equipment. The police are going to turn out with a lot of guns and catch you or engage in huge firefights. But if the police are effective at throwing you in jail, you're not going to stay there anyway. So when one of those components of the system breaks down, then you've got a kidnapping problem.
Right. In professional negotiations, it's not just hostages, suicides, deals for cars and pay raises, is it? I mean, you mentioned before with your company, there's other stuff that you now negotiate. Can you just put a bit of a spotlight on some of the other things and areas in which you get called into these days to go in and negotiate?
Well, the most dangerous negotiation is one you don't know you're in. which means anytime the word yes is in the air or I want is in your head, you're in a negotiation. Somebody's trying to get you to say yes, you're in a negotiation. We get involved in business negotiations at all levels. And we look at it very broadly. So we're negotiating for publicity. We're negotiating for media exposure. We're negotiating for access. The more we're negotiating the stuff that leads to money. I mean, we want money like everybody else does. We got to pay our bills. But we also understand a lot of it is getting in front of the right person. Pick the most successful businessman in your country. What would you give to have lunch with that guy to get some jewels of wisdom from that person? What are the intangibles that make it worthwhile? Would I rather be hired by Mark Cuban in the United States, a very well-known businessman, TV show Shark Tank's on. Everybody seems to know who Mark Cuban is in the U.S.
Yeah.
Would I rather have him pay me to do something, or would I rather, what would I do for him if he took a picture of himself reading my book as if he was interested in it, or if he put it on his list of must reads? Those are intangible things. So we began to look at intangible things that impact businesses, and we help people work deals out where they make better deals all the time, and they get more off the table as a result of being open to interesting ideas.
Right. And have you got, I'm just thinking as you're talking there, that Mark Cuban example, what would you say is one of the more off-the-wall type negotiations you've been in? Obviously without giving any secrets away, but what was one of the ones you thought, okay, we can do that, but I hadn't thought of it that way?
I look at them, I take that attitude to every negotiation. I mean, every negotiation should be interesting. And if it is interesting, it actually increases. If you look at it that way, and a book that I'm reading now is called The Rise of Superman, which is about X-game high-performance athletes and how they get to the next level in terms of performance. And, X-Games athletes perform better simply because their concentration and their decision-making improves, which is exactly what you need in a business negotiation. Your focus and your decision-making needs to improve. You need to see more. Well, one of the most famous X Games athletes of all time said, I just wanted to do interesting things in a fun way. With that attitude, his brain actually works better. He picks more stuff up. He thinks more. He's more creative. He's calm, but he's not dispassionate. There's an interesting difference between those two ideas. So if I look at all my negotiations as interesting things, the chance that I'm going to make a good deal because I'm sharper, I'm more focused, are going to increase because my brain is going to be able to process more. I'm trying to take the lessons of X-game athletes and apply them because negotiation is just another aspect of human performance.
And how do you then, I mean, people in a workplace environment, they go in every day, it's the same thing, or they might view it that way. How do you drive that interest in something like that? I mean, if you were talking to someone who was in the workplace, part of the same environment day in, day out, how do you find or how do you stimulate that interest, even though you may have switched off? Is there a way that you do that to keep things fresh and keep that mindset of every negotiation I'm in is interesting?
Yeah, great question. I mean, how do we get out of the mundane, right? How do we get out of the dull day-to-day drudgery and the grind? You got to kind of make some certain decisions for yourself. You got to be interested. First of all, all you got to do is be actually interested in getting better. If you're like, oh yeah, I'll be happy to be better, I'm just not willing to do anything to get better. Well, that ain't never going to happen. You have to actually be interested in doing better. And then if you can just realize that the brain is up to 31% more effective in a positive frame of mind. There's a lot of data out there that indicates that that's the case. And if you can accept that and just make a tiny little switch just to put yourself in a positive frame of mind, and that's a choice. You got to make that choice, though. It can't be made for you. If you're determined that people are unpleasant or that people are bad or that people are out to cheat you, what you've done is you've intentionally put yourself in a negative frame of mind. And then you're trying to, people then go out of the way to try to prove that other people are jerks. You have to actually be interested in lifting a finger to make yourself better. And then as soon as you start to lift that finger, if you let it happen, it can actually come to you very quickly.
Agreed. All right. Well, let's turn our attention then to your book. It's called Never Split the Difference. It came out, I think it was May last year, was when the book was released.
May of last year. It was, and I'm sure you know the significance of the date. It was May 17th, so that was 2 days before Ho Chi Minh's birthday, and I'm sure you were celebrating Ho Chi Minh's birthday.
Of course. I didn't want to interrupt you as a good host. So I thought I'll let you say it, and you can go with that. That's good.
That's what you get when you're an FBI agent who worked terrorism. You know those really obscure things like when is Ho Chi Minh's birthday?
Yeah, I can imagine. You'd never know when it could come in handy, right?
You never know, right? You can bring all conversations to a complete halt with information like that.
Yeah, for sure. Now, one thing when I was reading the book, and as I said, it was a brilliant book, so much to take out of it. But one of the questions that came up in my mind was, as you put it out there, you talk a lot about the protocols and things that you did while you're in the FBI. Are there any security issues or IP concerns about putting that sort of information out into the public? I mean, it's almost like the playbook, if you like, for anyone who is in the business to say, well, I'll read this book, I'll know what's going on. But my hunch is that it's not the case. And I was just wondering if there was an issue with it and why or why not it's a problem.
Everything that was in my book was vetted by the FBI before it went out there. Mm. So if there was anything, and it was conditioned in my previous employment, I promised never to publish anything about the FBI without letting them have a look at it first. So I happen to know in advance that everything that was in my book was already out in the public domain in one way or in another.
Yeah.
So what I was an aggregator of the information, but I didn't reveal anything that hadn't already been out there. Is there a concern that it would be out there? The reality is that the bad guys are already using a lot of this extremely effectively because it is so effective. Mm. In my view, what this really just does is it's a great aggregator of the information for the good guys. Because the bad guys are using this stuff on us, whether we like it or not. Yeah. So we might as well be wise to it to have an understanding of what the people that are working against us are using.
Yep, for sure. And I also think there's a component of it, as I was reading the book and trying to answer that question for myself, a component of it is that negotiation's more than just a tactic. And I think you say it in the book. I mean, it's not so much you've just got to have all these strategies. You can go point 1, point 2, point 3. Right, I've been through the process. Where's my deal? There's more to it than that. So if you go into it thinking that this is just all mechanics, and you mentioned emotional intelligence before, and we'll get into that in a moment, but there's a whole lot more to this. And the purpose of negotiation is much more than just a transactional set of steps that we need to follow.
Yeah, and exactly. And if you're into creativity, if you're into interesting conversations, if you're into challenges, like if you want your life to be a series of following instructions, if you do this, then you should do that. That's not negotiation, and that's mundane, and that's actually, how people get into a life of drudgery that they don't really enjoy. But if the idea of being creative appeals to you, negotiation's about creativity. It's the idea of a great collaboration and doing stuff other people couldn't do. Mm. And that's what appeals to me about negotiation. So it becomes an opportunity for creativity, an opportunity for better relationships, an opportunity for some fun. Mm. What can I find this conversation nobody thought of that'll make this better for everybody? To me, that's fun, and that's why I'm into it.
Could what you do in your role be considered being almost like the ultimate team building exercise?
Yeah, interesting point. I absolutely think it could, because it's about great collaboration and getting people into it, either whether they know you're getting them into it or whether or not you just use a great process that drags them into it anyway, and suddenly they find out that it went really well. So yeah, I think it is a great team process, and we actually negotiate in teams most of the time anyway.
And my thinking was that everyone says, look, we can be on a team and we don't all have to get along, but we have to work together. And I think working together is one of the key elements of certainly what I teach and train people on. And I think that's got to be the first thing, right? I mean, you go into a negotiation, you've got to find a way of working together.
Or you're going to hurt yourself, or you're going to hold yourself back. And that's kind of one of the unavoidable realities. There's a saying: if you want to go fast alone, if you want to go far, go as a team. Mm. me as an individual, by myself, I can function more efficiently by myself. And if I get together with a team, by definition, it's probably going to be less efficient in our actions. But also the reality is we're going to get a lot farther as a team. And people don't see that all the time because and I can get this done really fast if I just do it myself and I don't try to get somebody to agree with me. But the nature of reality is you get farther as a team every time. So you may as well figure out how to work as a team.
And in your sense, the team then becomes, I suppose, the people that you want playing on your team. Now, that includes, obviously, the person you're negotiating with. I think the person, if it's a kidnapping, obviously the person that's been kidnapped, the family's involved, you've got the FBI. There's all sorts of players involved in that scenario.
Yeah, and some of them may or may not feel like collaborating with you. And the majority of the time, whether or not they are going to collaborate with you will depend exclusively on whether or not they feel like it, which is really dumb because that means it doesn't depend upon whether or not they should or whether or not it's in their best interests, but it really depends upon whether or not they feel like it. And as soon as you get the word should or what should be in their best interest out of your head, you get them to feel like it a lot quicker.
Yeah, so the aim is not to get what you want, but to get them feeling a certain way. It's all about controlling their emotional state then.
Yeah. Well, I would say, because I get a little worried about the word control, but I like influence.
That's right.
I mean, I can have a tremendous amount of influence over them as soon as I let go of the whole control idea.
And one of the other things you talked about that is another sort of almost like a counterintuitive point or a point that goes against our default nature is to acknowledge the negative up front and diffuse it.
Yeah, first of all, it's that's so effective to do that in my company, we're so addicted to it. I mean, we do it all the time. I mean, we know how intensely effective it is, how fast it moves things forward. Like when I don't have time to talk you into anything, I'll say something. I say, you know what, you're not going to like this. This is a lousy proposition. You're not going to like this at all. And then I'll shut up. And the chances that I am going to get you to agree have just gone exponentially through the roof. But it's very counterintuitive, which is why I like it, because I know that I have a tremendous competitive advantage against the people that are not doing it. And 80% of the planet don't do it. And I love having a competitive advantage over everybody else.
What is that advantage? Like, what is the advantage that lies behind that strategy of going in and just hitting the negative straight up front? The negative influences on whether or not we will or we won't do something, that our negative thoughts have anywhere from 3 to 9 times the impact as the positive thoughts. So the way I try to describe this is you've got 2 targets you can hit. The reasons why somebody will do something are the reasons why they won't do it. And the reasons why they won't do it carry 9 times the weight. But it's like looking at 2 different targets and they're both exactly the same size. And you get 1 point for hitting one target and you get 9 points for hitting the other target. Now, if you're lazy, you're going to shoot at the 9-point target. I'm lazy. So I know that I could pile up the points that I need to pile up faster by diffusing negatives than I can by pitching positives. If I can get all the negatives out of the way, half the time the deal will make itself, because the barriers to negotiation, the barriers to agreement are much bigger than the biggest obstacle to overcome, and the good stuff will take over and it'll be self-sustaining. All I got to do is get the negative out of the way. Interesting.
One of my students, when I was explaining this in class one time at Georgetown, said to me, "Oh, that's why when I was learning sales, they told us we had to demonstrate 9 times value to make the sale. Not double value, triple value, quadruple value." He said, if we wanted to make the sale, we had to show somebody that something was worth 9 times what it cost. That's talking about that exact same dynamic. And why? And so you also asked me, why don't people do this? Why don't people go after the negatives? Because people are used to doing it slightly wrong and having it blow up. So what is slightly wrong? Instead of identifying the negative, denying it. Instead of saying, I don't want you, what they typically say is, I don't want you to think that I don't care about how you feel. I'm listening to a sports call-in show the other day. One of the professional athletes who called in was going to level a critique of another professional athlete, and he said, I don't want to sound disrespectful, but this is what I think. And as soon as he got off the phone, the sports host said, as soon as somebody says, I don't want to sound disrespectful, the very next thing is going to be disrespectful. Yeah. If he'd have just said, I'm sure this is going to sound disrespectful, and then made his observation, afterwards the host would have said, he's a straight shooter.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's a 2 millimeter difference. When you say, I don't want this to seem, that's the wrong way. The right way is, it sure seems like, and that's the tiny little difference. But most people don't know that 2 millimeter change.
Yeah, the 2 millimeters. It's so important. Well, let's look at another 2 millimeters then, and you talk about again in the book, getting over conflict with empathy. That is at the heart of this book. It's one of the core aims. How do we get over conflict using empathy?
Right.
In your mind, why is that such an important point?
Well, all right. So let's go with the mercenary's definition of empathy here, all right? Mm-hmm. If we may. And the mercenary would define it, and Daniel Goleman actually calls it cognitive empathy, and he says that sociopaths are the absolute best at this. It's not agreeing nor disagreeing. It's just identifying the other side's perspective. Now that sounds really simple, but the important part of that is what's left out. It doesn't necessarily have to have a basis in truth. It doesn't have to be fair, just the other person's perspective, which is why we have a real problem with it a lot of times, because the other person's perspective, by definition, is probably going to not be 1,000% accurate, which means somebody's going to be wrong. And a lot of us say, well, I can be empathic as long as I'm right, or as long as they're not wrong.
Yeah.
And so this whole right or wrong thing is not part of that dynamic. And once you drop the right or wrong or the agreement or disagreement aspect of it, actually it liberates you to the point where you can use empathy effectively with anybody on the planet. I can use empathy with a terrorist. I can use empathy with a head chopping terrorist. And if I can use it with him, and empathy is as powerful as some people contend it is, and I'm one of those people, then, and it's so powerful that actually an American author, Adam Grant, wrote an article called The Dark Side of Emotional Intelligence. It's so powerful that it has a dark side. If you can wrap your mind around that, you can really make some crazy deals that you wouldn't have been able to make otherwise.
Yeah. And I think it's part of just saying that empathy as well is, it doesn't have to be, like you said, it's not right and wrong. There's no value judgment tied up in being empathetic.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. And another way that people get confused about this as well, we always hear the difference between empathy and sympathy. And I think you mentioned, in the book, and it was a really interesting take. What, in your mind, what's the difference between empathy and sympathy?
Yeah, all right. So I love the definition I learned back in the early 1990s when they were teaching me this stuff to begin with, because they had to get that in our heads right off the bat. And he used to say, look, seeing that somebody's in quicksand doesn't require you to jump into the quicksand with them. I can see your problem without having to have that problem, without having to feel your pain. That's such nonsense. And you don't care if I feel your pain. You care if I can see your perspective. But you don't really care if I share your sadness. What you want is for whether or not I can see the dilemma that you're faced with. And if I can see your dilemma, then I might be able to help you come up with a solution. And that's a fundamental distinction. Empathy is seeing your perspective. I don't need to feel it. I just need to see what it is. And I need to show you that I can see it. Now we can talk.
Now we've got somewhere to go. Right, I understand. And then beyond empathy, you talk then about something called tactical empathy. And you describe that as being emotional intelligence on steroids. So where are we going there? When we've gone from sympathy to empathy, now we're talking tactical empathy.
All right, so we know too much about this to just use this generic label empathy anymore. And we've got brain science that backs it up. All right, so tactically speaking, I know that if you have a positive reason for doing something, a positive driver, if I simply label that with this tool that we refer to, I say, it seems like this is important to you. It seems like you care about this. It seems like you like doing a good job. all those are different versions of labeling a positive in your head. That increases that feeling in your brain. It punches a particular part of your amygdala, which triggers chemical releases in your brain, serotonin, dopamine, those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. Tactically, I know that happens. Tactically, I know that if there's something that's bothering you, and I say, sounds like it really makes you angry when people aren't honest with you. That takes that negative emotion that's banging in your brain at a weight of anywhere from 3 to 9 times the force of the positive emotions, and it dials it down. And there's brain science that shows it dials it down every time. So once I start to understand the different components of what's driving you, I can make tactical choices on which ones I want to increase or which ones I want to decrease. And that's why we call it tactical empathy. We just know too much about it now that I can make specific, strategic, tactical choices with what I want to do and what's influencing your mind.
And it is extremely powerful. I mean, some of those things where you talk about the labeling, I think that's sort of a game changer, and it can be a game changer for people who are not only in leadership positions, but trying to have these relationships in the workplace as a team every day.
It's an absolute game changer. It's a game changer in a workplace. It's a game changer for your interpersonal relationships. Yeah, it's huge. It's always worth taking the time, because the extra distance that you cover as a result is always going to far outweigh whatever effort it took you to cover it.
Yeah. And then another thing, and it's almost going into this idea of hitting the negative on the head as well. But we have this fear as well about one of the things we're taught to do is that we all must get along. And this is in a team setting. So in a team setting, one of the things we get taught is that we all must get along. And that's until we don't. And then everyone flips the message and says, well, we don't have to get along. We just have to do the work. But one of the main strategies we use to get along is pleasing one another. And we try to please one another because that means we'll all get along. And because of this strategy, we avoid using the word no as much as possible. It's all got to be yes. Now, having read the book, I know what your answer is, but is this a good strategy?
Well, what you're trying to accomplish behind it is a good idea, but the implementation is bad. In order for us to be as collaborative as possible, it's like the difference between do I need to be liked or do I need to be likable? I should be likable because it's going to have a positive impact on you and you're going to think better. Do I need you to like me? No. And if I can begin to draw some of those distinctions, I can be very likable.
Yeah.
And that will impact whether or not we work well together. Do I need to know that you like me? No. So there's some real subtle distinctions here. And I understand the theory behind why we're doing these things, but the actual implementation has broken down because of a misunderstanding of how people's brains work. So, a positive environment, the brain works up to 31% more effectively if I'm in a positive frame of mind. So as a mercenary, I want us to have a positive environment because we're all going to be smarter.
Yep.
If I really care about you, I'm going to want it to be a positive environment because it matters to me that you're happy. Same idea for two completely different reasons.
And how do we then use this idea of the word no? I mean, people then avoid that and they think, well, it's always got to be yes, then we've got to be moving forward with yes, 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 and everything's got to be agreeable. Like you said, there's a difference between wanting to be liked or needing to be liked versus being likable. But when we get to use the word no, you use that in a real positive sense, and you don't shy away from using the word no.
Yeah, we love the word no. I mean, it's all about context. Am I rejecting you or am I rejecting a bad idea? And when people say no, they feel protected. They feel like that they fended off harm. The mere act of saying no. It's why two things happen. It's why kids are relentless in their negotiations with their parents. Because what do we teach them? Because the kid says to us, Dad, can I? Mom, can I? And we say no before they've even finished the sentence. But having said no, we feel protected, and we're now actually more willing to listen. The kids don't know that. They know if they persist, there's a pretty good chance that we'll change our mind. They don't realize that they triggered the no, which made us more likely to change our mind. The number of times when my son was 17, Dad, can I now? But then I would say, all right, so what was it that you wanted? And a significant percentage of the time, having protected myself and being willing to listen, I thought, all right, well, there's a way that we can make this work. What I'm doing is teaching my kid persistence.
Persistence, right. And also then no then becomes that entry point to where things open up. I mean, if you're not willing to hear the word no, then you're almost shutting down the conversation before it starts.
Exactly. And in many cases, no becomes absolutely the entry point that opens up the conversation.
Right. And in the same sense, then, where does that leave us with yes? I mean, in a sense, when you're training, I think there's a temptation, certainly at my level, then you talk about it and there's this tendency to say, does this make sense all the time? Does everyone understand? Do you know what I mean? And you're looking for that confirmation all the way through. And then recently it's changed. And rather than even saying that, you don't need that yes, obviously. And you talk about the word that's right. That's the most important thing. You'd rather hear a that's right than a yes.
Yeah, because a yes is often, I think 75%, a yes is counterfeit. A yes is a maybe. A yes is nothing. But that's right is always genuine. I mean, I would much rather lay a deal on a table and lay everything out. I said, here's what we're trying to accomplish, and here's how we're going to get there, and have the person on the other side say, that's right. Because now I know I got a deal. That's right is so much more powerful than yes. Yes is, we get trapped so often with yes that the counterfeit yes is what people are really good at. You know, do you want to make more money? Do you want to have more free time? Nobody ever tries to get you to say yes unless they're going someplace with you, and you might not like where they're going. And that's why we get good at the counterfeit yes.
A counterfeit yes.
But that's right. Yeah, a counterfeit yes. You know, the fake yes. You're mirroring me now, aren't you?
I did. I wanted to see if you got me. I was, because I was interested. I mean, you talk about the 3 different types of yeses.
Yeah, commitment, confirmation, and counterfeit.
And can we explain those briefly?
Well, you know, it's wherever this idea of momentum selling or yes momentum, and the academics have a term they call it mere agreement, which is the more likely that if you get a bunch of little yeses in a row, somehow you hypnotize the other person and you get the big yes, and they're going to live with it. And that's just such utter nonsense. But Google momentum selling, and people will look at that and, yeah, I want momentum. So how do I do it? I get them to say yes. I get them to say they want to make more money. I get them to say that yes, I want to have more free time. And then I'll make the deal. And if it was ever a good idea, it ain't anymore, because we've been trapped on yes so many times that people are sick of it. We're trapped on it so many times that one of my students, who was a wealth advisor, had a client, and his client's secretary called his secretary to move all their accounts. He was actually so good at this mere agreement stuff, this yes momentum stuff, that she had thoroughly gotten to the point where she didn't even want to get on the phone with him anymore at all. She wouldn't even speak to him. She wouldn't even speak direct. She had her secretary call his secretary. And he called her on the phone to find out what was going on. Thank God he was in my class, because he'd woken up to what a problem this yes momentum nonsense was. What happens with this yes momentum selling nonsense, is it works until the other person never wants to speak to you again.
Right.
And they won't return your calls. And then you wonder what happened. It's just really, really bad. And what happened was you were getting a lot of counterfeit yeses that led up to that. The other form of counterfeit agreement that most people don't see is, you're right. We love it to hear that. And the next thing you know, the person won't return your phone calls, and you don't know what happened.
Mm-hmm. And I think you give the example in the book as well. I think it was one of the first ones. And you get the telemarketer on the phone who's like, do you like to drink water or something like that? Those crazy sort of questions, I think, and everyone just tips in. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean, that's, and I know the hook is coming. I know they're trying to walk me into a trap. And some of the questions you get asked by these people are as ridiculously stupid as, do you like to drink water?
Yeah, exactly.
I know you're going someplace.
Exactly. I'd love to know. And I was thinking in the book, I wish you had have answered it. I was thinking, how do you actually answer that? If you get a call like that, what would your answer be?
You know, I had somebody on the phone the other day, and if somebody starts out with me on this, I try to help them. I want them to see that this is bad. And I said to this young lady on the phone the other day, I said, that's an obvious one. I mean, that is so blatantly obvious. You're clearly going someplace with that. What do you think you're doing to my trust in you when you're clearly leading me into a trap? Mm. And she was kind of like, oh, yeah, okay.
How did she recover? Or was it like, okay, I can see you're busy?
Well, what I wanted to leave her with was, because I knew she was selling me something, and I want to know what it was as quickly as I could so I could make up my decision. But she kept asking me these rhetorical questions, and I actually wanted her to come out of the conversation with the feeling that this yes nonsense was a problem. And it was because she's gonna have a lot of conversations where she's not gonna make the deal and nobody's gonna tell her why. You know, you never say to somebody, look, you're trying to trap me with yes, and I don't trust you because of it, and that's why we're not gonna make a deal. Nobody ever says that. But people are gonna continue to fail until they realize it's that approach that's killing them, because everybody else is gonna pass them by.
Yeah.
I just want people to come to realize it sooner so they stop wasting so much of their life with a really bad strategy. A poverty guaranteeing strategy is what the yes momentum is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's something definitely to look into, and I think shining the light on it like that, it's how these things change.
I hope so, yeah.
Let's talk about then dealing with emotions. Again, obviously, in your line of work and in your history, you can barely think of a thing that would be more highly emotionally charged. And the book talks a lot about how you lower emotional intensity in others. So you talked about before labeling, and how you can dial in those emotions up and down, the things you want to play up, the things you want to bring down. And we talk about that a lot in others. But what can we do to keep ourselves in check and talk ourselves down when things start going sideways or our emotions start getting the better of us?
You know, there's a couple of different things you could do. And, self-talk, the stuff that goes through your head, is always one of the biggest influences. But a tiny little 2-millimeter change, if you're trying to talk yourself up and you want to say to yourself, I can do this, I can handle this, I can do it. If you switch from that to, you got this, you can handle it, you can do it, that's actually more effective to say to yourself, you can handle this, than I can handle this. Tiny little change between the words I and you. Another thing is, you can try to you condition yourself for positivity, and that's why in so many parts of the world, the idea, the expression of gratitude is gained a lot of ground, a lot of traction, a lot of currency universally, because as soon as you're like, you know what, I'm lucky to be this far. I'm lucky I'm dealing with this. I'm only dealing with this because I live in a pretty good place. The manifestation of gratitude actually rewires the circuitry in someone's brain very quickly. It's different versions of it that cause the X Games people that we were talking about earlier, the super athletes. And the super athletes are performing better, not because they're that much better physically. Because a human being, the physical capabilities that we have haven't risen that much. But our ability to focus and make decisions is really largely determined on whether or not we keep ourselves in a positive frame of mind. And that's why the guy that I was talking about earlier is saying, I just want to do interesting things in a fun way. That bang puts him in a positive frame of mind, which makes him more capable. So your self-talk, this is interesting. This is crazy. As long as if your self-talk is repetitively positive in any manner, as opposed to negative, you suddenly start to put yourself in a more capable position mentally.
So it's about replacing that internal dialogue with things like better questions instead of the default being, well, this sucks. Maybe what can I learn from this?
Right, exactly. And then bang, you change your performance.
Okay. And one of the questions, I think we need to cover this topic, and again, I'm mindful of how long, we can talk for days on this stuff. But listening, obviously a massively important skill. I think it's another one, in my opinion, that gets overblown or we don't really understand. But the thing I wanted to talk to you about listening was that for many people, listening doesn't come easily. They end up listening more to the voice in their head and planning what they're going to say next in a conversation or an exchange.
Right.
So my question is, how do top negotiators avoid this sort of trap?
Well, this whole process that we're talking about in negotiation is actually interactive. I mean, I don't need to go dead silent. I just need to have you talk more than I do. So some of it is just the understanding that I got to check in with you occasionally, just because it's going to keep me more focused. You can't. I hate the phrase active listening, because it's people are like, oh my God, they've been talking about that since the 1970s. You're getting ready to you're going to put me to sleep. But it's not a passive process. It's a lot more than just active. There was a friend of mine here in Los Angeles. He used to be the general manager for the Los Angeles Dodgers baseball team, and they were wildly successful while he was their general manager. He was negotiating the contracts to put the athletes on the field. And one of his favorite phrases is, in a 2-hour conversation, there's going to be 90 seconds of solid gold. Somewhere in that 2 hours, you're going to say something that's going to be the key to everything. Well, how do you get that? I got to get you talking. I got to keep my mouth shut. I got to keep your mouth going. I have to encourage you to continue to talk. I've got to encourage you to review yourself. I've got to make you feel comfortable talking, because somewhere in that 2 hours, you're going to say something that's going to give me how I'm going to make this deal the way I want it. And that's why listening, so few people do it well, because they think it's easy. It looks easy. But in every negotiation book that's out there, listening is always listed as an advanced skill. Nobody gets an advanced skill by not working at it.
For listeners, how can they help overcome that problem then when they're communicating with their teammates? I mean, if you could sort of say to them, how do you stop those noises in your head? How do you start paying attention to people? What would be the entry point for people to really make a change in the way that they listen?
Well, if you start doing it a little bit at a time every day, you'll be surprised at how fast it comes to you. So, everybody thinks this is really important. All right, listen every day from noon to 12:30. No matter who you're interacting with, make sure that all you're doing is paying attention to them. If you can't do it for half an hour, do it for 15 minutes. Pick out a small segment of time that you are going to listen incredibly. Now, what'll happen is, there's a saying in brain science: the neurons that fire together wire together. As soon as you start picking out little bit of segments of time in each day, the neural connections in your brain that are required to listen effectively will start getting some practice firing together. You put yourself in a different frame of mind. First couple of days you do it, it'll feel really awkward. You'll feel really self-conscious. The neurons haven't quite wired themselves together yet. You do it 3 or 4 days in a row for 5, 10, 15 minutes at a time. Pretty soon you find yourself, you've been listening for the last hour. You've been interacting for the last hour. You haven't been trying to make your point. You're actually trying to get that's rights out of people. You start getting 4 or 5 days into it, then lunchtime, the only thing I'm going to do today over lunch, I'm going to get that's rights out of people. You built yourself up to that very quickly in a matter of a couple of days. Neurons that fire together wire together. You're starting to wire those neurons, and you start getting good at getting that's rights out of people. Suddenly, that's all you're doing, because 90% of your deals are getting made by themselves because you got a that's right out of the other person. And then when you get good at it, it becomes very addictive.
I can imagine. But that's great. I think that's a great idea, that just setting that time aside. And as you say, at the very start of the show, I mean, you said it's the quickest way to get this communication done. What might take a conversation of an hour then becomes infinitely shorter, because you're just letting it flow the way it needs to. You're not trying to get a point across. You're not trying to inject yourself into the conversation as much.
Right. And you get out of deja vu where you're having the exact same conversation every single day trying to get that task done.
All right. Well, let's talk about, I've got one more question that I wanted to ask you. And I'm just interested in what your answer is going to be. But given a choice, given the training and all the stuff that you do and what you've seen, I mean, we could have taken this discussion of you in your position as a hostage negotiator as the ultimate leader, but we've gone down the pathway of team. I'm interested to know, would you train someone to be a better leader or a better negotiator if you were given the choice?
A better negotiator, because then they're going to be able to turn around and apply the stuff right straight into leadership. Top level performers, no matter what you're doing, the top performers of every segment have been shown consistently to be the people with the most emotional intelligence. And negotiation is about building your emotional intelligence, which is a very buildable skill, nearly unlimited, as opposed to your IQ, which has a limitation. Your IQ is like your height. Mm-hmm. No matter how much good food you eat as a child, you're only going to get so tall. Your IQs can only go so far, no matter how much chess you play, no matter how many times you spin that Rubik's Cube around. But your EQ, your emotional intelligence on the other side, is nearly unlimited. So if you're building your EQ through negotiation, then you can turn around and put that stuff right straight into any other endeavor that you're involved in, and you will be the top performer in your strata amongst your peers.
It's a skill. I'm just sitting here nodding my head. I mean, it's a skill I think that we could all do a lot to improve ourselves on it and really get some really impactful gains in terms of whatever it is we're trying to do, be it at work or in our hobbies, like you said, with the X Games people. It just seems so powerful. So that's really good. So, Chris, given the time, what I want to do is jump in now to our top 10. It's 10 quick questions that I like to ask guests at the end of our episodes. Are you up for 10 quick questions?
Let's go for it.
All right, let's do it. Question number 1. What is one thing you feel must be present or created for a team to succeed?
A positive environment.
All right. Number 2. What is one thing you feel must be avoided or overcome in order for a team to succeed?
People hiding their anger from other people, letting anger fester. All negativity festers like an infection. It doesn't heal itself. It just gets worse.
And as you said in the show, the best thing to do is confront it, acknowledge it, and shine a light on it.
Shine a light on it. Acknowledgement makes so much of it go away. It only leaves you with the actual problems that you have to deal with.
Okay, number 3. What team, current or historic, would you love to have been a member of?
The All Blacks. I just got exposed to a little, almost everybody in the world knows who they are. But at a conference I was at in Australia recently, in Brisbane, a speaker came up and said, historically the most successful sports franchise of any kind of all time. And I'm like, ooh,
wow!
I didn't know that, because in so many ways, sports are a metaphor for life. So what is it that drives these guys? What that drives the franchise? What mistakes have they made? What wrong paths have they gone down and resurrected themselves from? I'd love to have been in the middle of that at any given point in time to learn from that environment.
Sure. Okay, number 4. Who is an ultimate team player in your eyes and why?
Another guy that I'm really interested in these days also that I'm starting to try to learn more from is Bono of U2. How many rock bands have held together through the successes that they've held through to and stayed together for that long a period of time without the public blowout? I mean, there's been one or two other, because it's an entertainment, it's a team approach. There's a lot of money involved. I say like the Rolling Stones, but the Rolling Stones have had some very public falling outs amongst each other. And by and large, their leader, Bono, this guy, has found a way to navigate this. These guys have been around for so successfully and so long, people forget how long these guys have been around. They're still relevant and they're still having an impact on the planet in so many ways. So I would love to learn more from that guy.
Number 5, what 3 qualities make someone a great teammate or colleague?
A good sense of humor, ability to work hard, and just respect and appreciation for, how I feel about stuff. Don't necessarily need them to agree or disagree, but I know that person has an appreciation of what bothers me.
Right. Number 6, what 3 qualities make someone a great coach or manager?
Well, yeah, you need a little more from a coach or a manager. You need a little more caring. Not the smothering type, but if a great coach or a great manager, like if you go down, if you don't do well, if you're defeated, I mean, it matters to them how you perform. And so you want your coach to want you to succeed. You want your coach to care about you. You want your coach to genuinely want you to have a better life. You want your coach to let you make mistakes and respect your autonomy and let you screw up. But I think what we really, and it's one of the reasons why I view myself as a negotiation coach, and we coach negotiations as opposed to just teach and train. Maybe a lot of people teach negotiation could care less how successful you are, could care less. I mean, we want the people that we coach, we want to brag about the deals that they made by grasping what we're trying to get across to them and having them implement it and do crazy, ridiculous, positive things. So I think you want your coach to actually, it matters to your coach whether or not you do well.
Yeah, you want them genuinely invested in your success.
Yes.
Cool. All right, number 7, what's one thing that instantly makes you feel part of a team?
Yeah, I mean, whether or not somebody will stop and actually pay attention to, more often than not, whether or not something bothers me. Mm-hmm. If somebody just says, "Hey, man, and are you okay?" I mean, genuinely, sometimes people go like, "Are you okay?" Like, whatever it is, drop it and move forward. But if somebody looks at you and says, "Are you okay?" Mm. And like, "Hey, look, I notice you're not okay. And I'm not trying to get you to drop it. I mean, I genuinely mean it." And I think the different people that I've been around that when I was struggling and let me know that they knew that I was struggling, that was all. They saw it, they could let it go, not let it go. And I had a couple colleagues at different times who were actually engaged in a dispute with each other. I didn't know it. On separate days, I looked at them and I said, "Are you okay?" And they were like, yeah, I'm fine. A couple of months later, both of them separately told me that it really helped that I noticed, and then I let it go, but I showed them that I noticed. So I think seeing that sometimes makes me feel like I'm part of the team.
Number 8, what is one thing that instantly makes you feel excluded from a team?
Indifference. Mm. Yeah, I mean, I hate it. When someone is indifferent to me. Like, yeah, okay, fine, I certainly don't feel a part of what you have going on. So, yeah, indifference.
Yeah, indifference. Okay, number 9. What is your fondest team memory?
I can't. There was a group of guys that I worked with when I was in New York, and I keep thinking back to one particular guy in particular made us all feel like a team. He was very good-natured. He worked really hard. And I can't, there's probably a lot of different memories where these guys really made me feel like we worked together. But we were always looking out for each other. And it was just more, we had a lot of fun together. And, I just always felt like those guys, had my back. It was a group of investigators I worked with when I was in New York. Mm. I can't come up with anything more specific than that right now. They were great guys. We went a long way together. We had a lot of fun together.
That sounds great. Okay, and number 10, Chris, what is one thing that you'd like to hear a coach, a manager, a boss, or a teammate say about you?
That I was a good guy. And what's the definition of good? He worked with us. We got along with him. His basic moral compass was good. We didn't have to worry about this guy betraying us. He was there and he cared. When we needed him, he showed up. He actually cared whether or not how we all did as a team.
He cared. I love it.
So, that would all go into being a good guy.
It's a great definition of good guy. I love it. And I think that's the ideal place for us to say thank you and to call it a day. Thank you again for coming on. There is so much to take out of it, and like I said, I had pages of questions, and I'd love to ask them all to you, but I know you've got plenty of things to do.
And we got to get people to come to my website, right?
We do. I was about to say, what do we do? How do we find you? And aside from the book, which I'm going to put in the show notes, the link to it and everything like that, but how do we find you?
Go to the website, blackswanltd.com, BlackSwanLTD.com. But here's what I want you to do when you go there. Find the tab on the website for the blog, The Edge, and sign up for our newsletter. When you do that, what you do is you get a short, concise weekly article on how to get better at negotiation. Plus, it's the gateway to the different types of training that we do. The negotiation newsletter is free. It's the gateway to the stuff that you can get for yourself for free, and what you might want to buy for yourself to get yourself to become a better negotiator, a better teammate, to move your family forward, to have a better life, to live in a better house. So go to the website, look it over, sign up for our newsletter. We'll help you get better.
Fantastic. And I can vouch for that. I mean, I've got the newsletter. I'm signed up to it. I read it. I love it. I think this week's was how to unlock the floodgates of truth talk.
Yep.
Another brilliant post. I mean, they're all amazing. And it just gives you a different perspective on how to see things and things that you can really implement that aren't difficult. It's just opening that door and having a look at it.
Yeah, and knowing that it will work.
Absolutely, it will work. I think it's great. And if people want to share stories, if they put this stuff in place, they can obviously get in touch as well, and you'd be happy to hear those.
Absolutely, would love it. I love it when people let us know how they got something that we helped them get.
Terrific. All right then, Chris. Well, again, thank you very much, and we'll definitely stay in touch. And I look forward to taking what you've taught me through the book and our conversation today, and seeing how far that can really go.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem. So there you have it. As I mentioned at the top of the show, we covered a lot of ground, but I know it's just the tip of a huge iceberg. I don't know about you, but negotiation experts and the whole notion of influence intrigues me. I think I could have talked with Chris literally for days. Now, for some housekeeping. In case you didn't write it down, Chris's book, Never Split the Difference, is available everywhere. But there's a link in the show notes to help you get your copy from Amazon. And we get a little change from that deal as well, from you clicking on that particular link. So please use it. And in case you're wondering, no, you don't pay any extra. Also in the show notes are links to Chris's website and his sign-up page for the newsletter. Now, this newsletter is something you simply have to sign up for. It's a quick read, but man, is it on point. The articles are chock full of ideas, strategies, and testimonials that just reinforce how good Chris is at teaching this stuff. Finally, before we go, please be aware that I'm still on the hunt for reviews on iTunes and looking for people to join our Team First movement on both Instagram and Facebook. In the show notes are a couple of links to show how to leave a review, and that handle again for Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and everywhere else is @BarnraisersPod. So get busy. We hope to see you on there real soon. And I know I say this on every show, but I can't stress it enough. Reviews, likes, and comments are the lifeblood for any podcast or fledgling online venture. And although we have big plans and seem to be putting out some great content according to you guys, the listeners, we're still young and vulnerable, and we need your help. So please, if you can make a point this week of taking just a couple of minutes to connect with us, say hi or leave a review, then that would really help put some wind in our sails. And for bonus points, why not go the old-fashioned way and tell some of your friends when you see them, face to face? If they don't know what a podcast is, then that's cool. Do it anyway. I promise, at the very least, you'll sound like a tech wizard. That's about all for this week's show. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another conversation with one of the world's ultimate team players. And if you can't wait that long to hear from us, then please do check out that Instagram account where we're posting a ton of content that's all based on Team First inspiration, and people are going crazy about it. So come along and join in the fun. All right, I'm out of here. I've been Dan Stones, this has been Barnraisers, and until next time, remember, Better is always possible. Bye for now.